Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Orton Family Foundation's call. My name is Fran Stoddard, and today's Heart and Soul Talk is on reversing the brain drain in rural America. So millennials, our lives are driven by technology, and according to conventional wisdom, are drawn to urban areas. But in this webinar, we dig deeper into reasons millennials deliberately choose to settle in small towns. We begin with Ben Winchester, who is joining us from Minnesota, who has spent his career studying trends in rural migration of all ages. Hi, Ben. Just say hi, make sure we know you're there.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you, Fran.
After Ben shares his data and sets the stage, we'll hear from three millennials who have chosen small towns as their home and are actively contributing to the vibrancy of the places that they live. I'd like to quickly welcome Brittany Grimes. She's from Galesburg, Illinois. Hi, Brittany.
Hi, Fran. How are you?
Okay, great. And Bree Henderson from Laconia, New Hampshire. Welcome, Bree.
Hi.
Just say hi. I'm not seeing your image right now, but I know we've got you.
Can you see me now?
And okay, yes, we can hear you now. And then finally, Whitney, and last but not least, certainly, Whitney Kimball-Coe. She's the coordinator of the National Rural Assembly. She'll share her story and insights and then afterwards we'll get to your questions. She joins us from Athens, Tennessee. Hi, Whitney. Terrific. So, and welcome to all of you. We are using the Adobe Connect platform, as you can see today, that allows us to share our guests, a few visuals, and take your questions. Be sure to click on that link to follow along if you're not with us already. Join our sound via computer or the phone number that's on your screen or that's been sent out. Nearly 70 of over 650 registrants for today's webinar have already sent in questions to our talk, and we want to thank you for that. I've combined questions that are similar to each other, and we'll get to as many of them as possible after the presentations. There will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions during this talk, and we'll do our best to stay alert to those questions coming in. Chat box will be here for your comments, ideas, and those questions. If you're having any technical difficulties, probably the best thing to do is to email our colleague, Caitlin Davison. You can see her troubleshooting email at the bottom of this page. It's cdavison@orton.org. So if you're having any audio or video issues, please email Caitlin. And let's get on with the talk and our special guests. Rural sociologist Ben Winchester is a senior research fellow for the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality. Ben specializes in community development, demographic analysis, data visualization, and leadership. His myth-busting research is helping to rewrite the rural narrative, specifically about community-held views about brain drain in rural communities by noting an influx of 30 to 49-year-olds to rural areas. So this is pretty different and very exciting. We've had Ben on before, and he's fantastic. So Ben, go ahead with your PowerPoint and set the stage for us. Thanks.
Great, thank you. It's certainly my pleasure to be here today. I just want to thank Orton for the leadership they've got in the field here to advance a conversation about rural in positive ways. You may or may not know my work. A lot of my life has been dedicated to really what I call rewriting the rural narrative. And my premise here is that the narrative we use to describe our small towns is utterly bleak. You would think there's nobody left, that the rural economy is dead, and that apparently the lucky few are the only ones that can escape, right? And the only people that are left are the ones that couldn't either afford to or have an ability to get out. Well, that's not true. In fact, we've had a significant amount of change in our rural communities, and I think this narrative is driven by that change in negative ways without a recognition on the other side that we actually have all these great trends going on. So you'll see the title of the talk here is The Brain Gain of Rural America, and I call it the brain gain because on the negative side, the brain drain is when we lose our 18-year-olds after graduation from high school. And apparently this is a big problem for our rural communities because They're the only talent we've got. And when they leave, it is apparently hollowing out our communities where there will literally be nobody left. And so this kind of led into the research I do around data analysis. And you'll see the subtitle here is Speak Softly and Carry Statistics. I'm a data geek, love data. I do not really appreciate it when folks start using anecdotes to tell me about trends, when in fact the plural of anecdote is not data. Anecdote can be a couple of people with very loud voices sitting around a table proclaiming the demise and doom and gloom of their towns when in fact it may not be true. So we will continue on here. My own history and rural studies has really been dominated by negativity. I think when you look at the landscape of rural publications, whether it's articles or books, it is all about, you know, what we used to have, what we could have had, where we, you know, what we should have had if, you know, the zoning board would have changed the zoning. We could have had 3M here 40 years ago. Well, I've heard that story in like 40 towns, and I just don't believe that 3M seriously considered 40 different towns. I think we have excuses like this because we believe our towns are not where they should be. Because we do have a lot of people who remember how our rural communities may have been. And so, you know, it's not to say we haven't gone through dramatic changes in our rural communities. The mechanization of agriculture alone reduced the number of farm workers in our rural communities by 40 to 80%. And I'm talking about 1915. At the same time, roads and transportation systems changed the landscape of not just how rural communities saw themselves, but how they saw their neighbors. And then there were some pretty dramatic negative changes that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s. We talk about Main Street restructuring. You know, we closed hardware stores, grocery stores. We couldn't have 3 gas stations in town anymore. We were down to 1. And I think with all of these dramatic changes, there were proclamations that, you know, if we lose our small town grocery store, our town is going to die. If we lose our hardware store, our small town's going to die. Well, honestly, there aren't just dead towns littering the rural landscape today. Somehow we have survived this, and more recently we continue to have discussions about school consolidations. And this becomes part and parcel of the negative narrative. We hang on all of these events as if it was one more nail in the coffin about our small towns, when in fact we do know that there are positive things happening. So I like the Mark Twain quote here, rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. And I attribute, this could be a quote about rural. You know, that we're not all dead out here. Yep, we have a smaller percentage of the population, but that doesn't mean that we've just got ghost towns littering the rural landscape. My point here is that rural is changing, just as much as urban communities are changing, but it's certainly not dying. In fact, since 1970, the rural population has not gone down, it's gone up. It's gone up by 11%. What has gone down is the relative percentage of Americans that live in a rural place, where in 1970, 1 in 4 people lived in a rural place, and by 2010, that dropped to 1 in 5. And this matters, obviously, politically with regards to representation, but at the same time, like, think about the growth even in your metropolitan areas in your state. Like, our urban areas in the U.S. have not grown taller, they've grown wider. And they've grown wider because people ultimately have had a preference for what migration folks call a low-density life. People do not want to live in the central city over the age of 30. And that's when they start to move out. It was the whole reason for the growth of the suburbs in the first place. And now in the 80s and 90s, we started to see second ring growth around our major urban areas. And we call them ex-urban areas now. We saw a lot of growth there. And why was it there? It's because the suburbs were too much like the city. So people had to move out a little bit further to get to this preference for small town and rural living. So the myth here is that, you know, only the lucky few escape rural America. One of the first data points, one of the first data points I ran across here was that in any 5-year time period, almost half of all American households move. We are a highly mobile population. And if we don't better understand these dynamics of who's moving in and who's moving out, it could be a real challenge for us. So I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but I will just say the brain drain, i.e. the loss of your young people after graduation, is not an exception. Do not beat yourself up because your kids choose to move away after high school graduation. What we have found pretty consistently is that the only counties that really attract 18 to 25-year-olds are college counties and core metropolitan counties. So, but even in those core metro, 35% of their young people move to a different community too. So losing your young people should not be viewed as some tragedy of our small towns, when in fact we should be looking more so at the opportunities for those people to come back to those rural communities. So the research that we've done, we call the brain gain. And what we have found is that there's been a pretty steady, significant, and regular movement of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s to rural communities. This happened in 98% of all rural communities in the country. So while you may lose people overall, right, the sign outside of town shows your population is going down, and you tend to use that as a hallmark for your success. So if your population goes down, you're a big loser, and if your population goes up, you're a winner. When in fact, it's much more complex than that. You've got a movement of high school kids out, you've got a movement of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s in, and some communities see a loss of people in their 70s and 80s as they need medical care. So we call this the brain gain. And we've done a significant amount of research in this around focus groups and interviews and surveys. And we asked people, why did you choose to move to a rural community? And the top 3 reasons people gave were, number 1, a simpler pace of life. Number 2 was safety and security, and that was especially high with people with kids. And number 3 was the low cost of housing. Now, in a majority of our studies, we have found that moving for a job was not in the top 10. People are choosing to live in these rural communities for a number of different reasons, and they even look at 3 to 5 different towns to move to. And what they end up choosing then is based upon these factors, and then they start to look for a job. So it's not as though people don't look for a job, but it's not the primary reason why they choose your town. And in fact, jobs today look very different than they used to. We don't all work in brick and mortar places. We may be self-employed. We may work from home. Telecommunications provides an opportunity for us to live anywhere. So really, in many ways, they've helped diversify the rural economy. We're not all farmers in rural America and haven't been for 75 years. A majority of employment in rural areas today is in education and health services. So we are very diverse economically, more so than ever before. There are also new people in our communities are creating new community groups. So there's this idea, I would argue out there, that social life is dying and that people don't want to be engaged in their rural communities. When in fact, when you look at data from the National Center for Charitable Statistics, we find that there's been, in any 10-year time period, the number of nonprofits in this country goes up between 30 to 40%. That is not an indicator of civic decline. Even in the most rural counties in this country, where we lose 1% of our population, the number of nonprofits still has gone up by 15%. So you can look at a map across the country too, and the greatest growth in the nonprofit sector has happened in the southeastern part of the country. And it's here that ultimately, it kind of surprised me because we're in Minnesota where we've got a high civic society, our voting rates are through the roof, home ownership is through the roof. And what we found was that while we did not really see as great a growth in the upper Midwest as the Southeast, the number of nonprofits per capita in the northern part of the states is still much higher than the rate of nonprofit growth in the Southeast on a per capita basis. So what we do have is kind of this negative language, though, around the young people. Like, hey, those young people, they don't care about this town. I never see them at my meetings. Well, you know what? They are involved. Yes, you're right. They're not coming to your meetings. They're going to theirs. And because ultimately we've got this great diversity in civic life today, but we have this very negative language. So I want to caution you all today that before you start using disparaging language about our millennials or our young people, we need to put it in check. Because when you say that, these young people are entitled or, they're snowflakes, that is probably the most disrespectful thing you can say to them. And now we look, we've reinforced this through our media as well. You look at the historical coverage of these generations about the young people, like Generation Gap in 1968, the Me Decade, 20-somethings, generational warfare, it's all about me, the Me generation. You could literally use the same cover for every young generation. This being, interested in yourself is not a trait of a generation, it's a trait of an age. Baby boomers were selfish too when they were 18 years old. So really, it's during this time period that people start to find themselves. But what we do know has shifted is how people get involved. They used to be involved in place-based groups with a broad focus. My example here might be the Hancock Community Betterment Club, a town I lived in for a number of years. But today, people want to be involved in just the opposite. Rather than a place-based groups, a narrow geography, it's a wide geography. Rather than a wide focus of the group, it's a narrow focus. So we move from the Hancock Community Betterment Club to the West Central Minnesota Bicycle Association. It covers 8 counties. You've still got a great number of people involved in them. But this is a major shift, and it challenges groups that are place-based. So my argument here is that these new residents, and especially younger people that move to our small towns, are more than warm bodies. One of the least effective ways to engage young people today is to ask people to sit on your board. What we do know is that young people prefer action-oriented task forces, not necessarily committee reports that consume all of our time. And they really work on decentralized approaches to leadership. And so how we do our work within our nonprofit sector needs to change. We can't just say like, hey, we had this meeting for them and nobody showed up. Well, how did you actually engage them? So I think there are some ideas out there, but it starts with a small request. Rather than saying like, hey, come to our meeting, it's like, hey, we're flipping burgers for the firemen on Saturday night. Would you like to join us? And get to know people, because if you don't know where people's interests lie, you're going to treat them like warm bodies, which ultimately means you need to fit into the kind of structures that we've got in place for these folks. So now, getting back to the narrative, so we have had people, and I just want to remind you that millennials are a wide age group right now. They're from 22 to 37 years old. And there are all these different life situations that people are in. And we have started to see movement of those in their 30s to our rural communities. But in many ways, our rural communities are inundated and filled up in terms of housing. So until we actually free up housing, there aren't actually going to be places for people to live. So we are about to change all this, though, because in many of our rural communities, about 30% of our rural homes are owned by people over the age of 70. And those homes are about to turn over. So then my question is, how welcoming is your town to young people? Because ultimately, these homes are going to be put on the market. And sometimes they're not even put on the market. It's like, hey, I know John's house is for sale, right? How do young people engage in this social infrastructure, especially if they're new to town? Of all the newcomers moving into your town, just 1/3 of the people are from there. A full 2/3 of newcomers moving to rural communities are not from there. So they don't have the social infrastructure that, John's kid has when he moves back to town. When you are new to a rural community, it can be a very scary thing. So I kind of use the movement of people to our rural communities to talk about this narrative. There actually is a national societal preference for people to live in small towns. And people have been moving to our rural communities, especially in great numbers, since the 1970s. And why does this narrative matter? Why do we need to, I would argue, stop this negative narrative? It's because my kids hear this. And when my kids are living in a small town and they hear that there's nothing there, that it used to be great and now it's terrible, then we really need to try to work on improving that community narrative, because honestly, the people who move to your towns never move there for pity. They move there for opportunity and hope. And if you don't hear those voices, you're not going to help improve your narrative. So really, these newcomers are creating groups. They're diversifying their economy. They're buying and starting businesses. Some are working from home. They're living in a region. They're not just living in your town, living and working, shopping, and play. And they're more than warm bodies. So the bottom line is, people do want to live and move to your towns. And they want to move to your towns for what you are today and what you will be tomorrow, not what may have been. So that's what I've got for today. I think it's a great chance here for us to hear from some of these folks that live in our small towns. So thank you for your time here today.
Perfect, Ben. Thank you so much. That really sets the stage in a beautiful way for all of us. And we did it's a little crackly still, so you can probably back off a little bit when you come back on with your microphone. But I think we heard every word. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Brittany Grimes. She is the Director of Public Relations and Marketing at Carl Sandburg College in Galesburg, Illinois, where she grew up in a very community-minded family. She left Galesburg to attend Virginia State University, and after graduating magna cum laude, Brittany started to work at a Fortune 100 company near Washington, D.C. She also gained a master's degree and then chose to return to her hometown despite the ravages of the economic crisis. She became involved in several community groups, including Galesburg's Community Heart and Soul Project, serving on their leadership and stewardship teams. It's great to have Brittany with us, and we look forward to more of your story. Go ahead,
everyone.
Brittany.
I would just like to say first and foremost, thank you for all the millennials that are in the chat. I saw a lot of y'all, so I feel, once again, along with my fellow presenters, feel very embraced by the community. I'm just going to speak really briefly about my experiences in rural America, as well as kind of what brought me back home. And I kind of entitled mine, What Millennials Want. Feel free to make comments, but I feel like a lot of this kind of resonates with a lot of millennials within my community, and probably even that of a greater community. So just to introduce myself real quick, I moved to Galesburg in 1994 with my family. My mother's side of the family is originally from Galesburg. My grandfather was actually the individual who kind of catapulted my life within community service. He was an alderman here in Galesburg, Illinois, first African-American alderman, actually. And he always brought me down to City Hall. My grandmother stayed involved with young individuals throughout the community for all of her life, and I watched that as well. So I saw what that really meant. And I also understood that the community that I lived in, despite my age, I realized that this is a good place to raise kids. And I would tell people that. I would say, hey, this is a great place to raise kids. This is a great community to live in for the sake of that. However, I don't know that I saw it quite that way when I was graduating from high school. At that time, as you already heard, I graduated from Virginia State University, which is a historically Black college university out of Petersburg, Virginia. I worked for 7 years for Altria Group Company out of the Washington, D.C. metro area. I was actually in Montgomery County. I spent some time at University of Maryland getting my master's, and decided to come home. My father was facing a few medical issues, and with it just being me and one other sibling, I thought it best for me to go ahead and come home. Another part of that really is and exists in the fact that there are a lot of opportunities in rural America that many people don't really get the opportunity to see, but they may not be as willing to really open themselves to, but need to understand what that really looks like. I'm going to take a little bit of time and actually take a step back and kind of talk about who millennials are according to me, according to a millennial. So obviously we've heard this before, and this is a lot of a conversation that you've heard in the previous presentation about, hey, we're between the ages of 37 and 32. I like to say that we're a reflection of the baby boomers because we are called the echo boomers. And in the sense, we really are. We're a reflection of that which was set before us. We're not the death of napkins. We're not the death of department stores, and we're not the death of home ownership. We consume information differently. We consider it efficiency, not laziness. We're trying to save time. We get so many messages, we're able to filter through it relatively quickly. And so we want to make sure that the existence that we are living in kind of reflects that. We do want stakes in our livelihood, in our community, and in our government. And that is something that you'll see probably as we continue to go forward in the future. I would also like to note that we are the tech, but we are also raised outside. So if we were born in rural America, or even if we weren't born in rural America, we were the ones that adapted to the technology. Some of us were born when technology and the internet, the advent of the internet, and had computers in every school, but some of us just grew up outside. And so I think we also need to remember that fact as well. What millennials want, I kind of limited it down to three things, at least three things that were really important to me, which was affordable, accessible housing. I would like to say that housing in rural America sometimes was an afterthought for millennials or for single individuals. This is a personal story. When I came back home, of course, I moved in with my parents to start out with, but I did want to live somewhere else. So I'm searching and searching and searching for trying to figure out ways. If I was in any metro area, I'm going to go back to my metro thought, which is, I'll look at, apartments.com. I'll look at, rent.com. Yeah, that wasn't the case. I had to ask someone who knew someone about locations to live in. And that made it quite difficult for me to actually acclimate to the rural environment, or at least rather acclimate back. So we want affordable, once again, accessible housing that we're not searching through thousands of people to get through. Once again, trying to be efficient with our time. We want communities that reflect our values and our interests. And so that varies from, as you said, from civic to religious to specific, even from the bicycle club. So we really want to see that reflection of ourselves within the society that we live in. Another part of that also is opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunity within the rural environment. What that looks like can be different for various people. For me, it was secure employment. For others, it might be volunteering, and then also just might be activities, outdoor activities, or any activities therein. So, kind of to really talk through this, I was really led back, of course, by family and opportunity. My mother usually said, you can really get 5 jobs in one here, which is really true. You get the experience and you get the career opportunities in rural America that I don't think that you could really get in a metro environment. You end up getting, I said, 5 jobs in one, which could be difficult for some, but I think of it and I see it as an opportunity for others. One thing that Galesburg, my town, has done very well in regards to kind of either trying to attract millennials or keep millennials is we have a lively downtown. We've seen the structure and the decline of our malls aren't necessarily where a lot of interest lies anymore. So we have a lively downtown. We have locally owned stores and restaurants. So all those mom and pop things that you could ever want. We have great antique shop. We have a wonderful Seminary Street Historic District. We care a lot about our history and our heritage. We have an active arts community through the Civic Arts Center and through the Orpheum Theater. We have a plethora of volunteer and philanthropic opportunities throughout the county and even regionally. For those who have children, we have promise programs in Galesburg and in a local community that allow students that graduate from Galesburg High School and have gone through the Galesburg High School system to go to 2 years to Carl Sandburg College, the community college, virtually for free. We are between two larger major regional hubs, Peoria, Illinois, as well as Moline, Illinois. And then we're also a 3-hour train ride from Chicago. So we have 3 times a day trains come back and forth from Chicago. So there's that thought process of, oh, millennials are said that we have FOMO or fear of missing out of whatever. Well, we have the opportunity to not only be active in our community, but also do those things outside regionally to make us get that holistic sense of life that we're really looking for. I think another thing that the community does really well is our Knox County Area Partnership for Economic Development, as well as our Galesburg Chamber of Commerce, does a really great job to try to pull together and try to attract millennials through this actual Thanksgiving. In a few weeks, they're actually going to host something called Reconnect, which is a really great opportunity for millennials that live in Galesburg to reconnect with their friends or wherever that are visiting and show them the opportunities that live and that exist here locally. Also, we have something called, we have a resource guide that they created together to give to employers to really talk about the great things that are going on in our community. So in all that being said, we really have great opportunities that exist here. I've been a part of Heart and Soul. I've been a part of NAACP, Support Group for African American Affairs. There's just so many things that exist and that we could really be a part of and really embrace. And it's really great to actually see that, and it's really great to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brittany. I think you've given hope to a lot of America right now. This is very moving to hear the opportunities that you have embraced and that you're creating in Galesburg. We're going to move on here. 2 more quick stories from next from Bree Henderson. We know she's a little under the weather, but she's here, and she'll make it through this. She is a master barber, instructor, and business owner in Laconia, New Hampshire. After serving in the U.S. Air Force, the Ohio native, who was 23 at the time, took a risk and established a barber shop in the downtown of this struggling small town. 6 years later, polished and proper barbershop and shave parlor has grown and moved to a larger space in a downtown that is experiencing an ongoing revitalization. Bree is active in her community, volunteering on several committees and boards for both nonprofit and municipal organizations. We look forward to your thoughts, Bree, and how you landed in New Hampshire.
Thank you for having me. Please be patient. My voice will do what it wants to do. So, as was said, I am from Ohio originally, a city called Mansfield, and then I joined the Air Force and moved to Tucson, Arizona. I lived there for 3 years, and then I found myself married and moving to New Hampshire after I got out. So I went from a city of 50,000 people to a city of 500,000 people to actually a really small town on the seacoast of New Hampshire. So going from a city where everything is there within a square mile in Tucson to being 20 minutes away from any store was quite the culture shock for me when I got to New Hampshire, because this entire state is kind of rural, as most other states would probably think of it, because we have one airport in the whole state. It's small. The city of Orlando has more residents than our whole state. So moving to Laconia a year after opening my barbershop was a little bit of an upgrade from the small town that I was living in. We do have things that are a little closer. It's a city of 16,000, but it is the only city in the county, which means it comes with its own problems, pros and cons, like anywhere. There's a lot of services that are here that they can't find anywhere else in the county. So those who are in the surrounding towns have to come here for those services. This is also the second oldest state in the United States, second only to Maine, which is right next door. So we're dealing with an aging population. My personal reason for opening a barbershop was strictly serendipity. All the right stars aligned and fell into place and gave me an opportunity to open a shop. My entire barber career has been fate in my eyes, because I had a GI Bill and I was not in a family situation at the time to give me a regular college experience. So entering into a trade just seemed like the right thing to do. And there was only one barber school in the state of New Hampshire at the time, and they had been closed for 3 months for a major renovation. And I called them the day that they opened, and I set up a meeting for the next day. And then I was signed up and in the last spot opening that they had in the class the following day. And the act of cutting hair never entered my decision-making, but I was in a mindset, being out of the military, that if I do what I'm told, I'll learn, just like any trade. So it turned out I had a knack for it, thankfully. And I had heard there was a generally known that Laconia needed a good barbershop. And it had just so happened that my father-in-law's best friend at the time wanted to sell his shop, which was on Main Street in Laconia. And so I went up. I'd never been to Laconia before. It was 20 minutes north of where my barber school was. I came through in the evening. Everything was dark. I think there might have been one or two things open after 5 o'clock, but they pretty much rolled up the sidewalks at that point. So I had a conversation. I had noticed that there was a beauty school down the road. There were probably a handful of salons on the same road, and another barbershop about 8 doors down. So I talked to the gentleman, and we came to an agreement, and I bought a shop. Now, thankfully, during my barber school, I was taught certain things that are needed. It's a very basic equation to run a barbershop, especially when you're the one doing the haircutting. barbershops are usually cash only, so there being 3 banks within reasonable walking distance in the downtown area was a big plus. The fact that seemed to be generally known that you could go downtown for a haircut was also another plus, given all of the places you could go. And the amount of parking, both on street and in lots surrounding the area, was also pretty phenomenal. But ultimately, the rest of downtown seemed very bleak, very unoccupied. But that didn't really bother me because barbershop is not a whim decision people make. It's not they walk by a storefront and go, oh, yeah, sure, I'll get a haircut. That's something that's on their list of things to do, and it has to be on that list on a regular basis for most people. So barbershops are destinations, period. So I wasn't really worried about the condition of downtown because I knew that I was going to make a destination, and I was going to offer quality. And I don't feel like I'm alone in that, in thinking that millennials, part of what attracts them is quality. And I think that is a huge part of why I fit in Laconia so well. After we were open for a year, I moved here, and I was within walking distance. So going from commuting an hour and 20 minutes each way every day to being able to walk to work is a wonderful plus for anyone, especially when it comes to gas. But in downtown, as we got stable and growing and we got to know people, telling people where I'm from, getting to know other veterans around, people got really excited, really welcoming. The fellow business owners downtown, they became my surrogate family because I have zero family in New England. I'm entirely a transplant all on my own. But they became the people that I leaned on for suggestions on where to take my business, how to tweak things, how to attract new people. Laconia it's one of those cities that has survived by being a vacation destination because we touch 3 different lakes, but it's also survived every winter by helping one another out. If you don't have your business neighbors on your side, you won't survive the winter. So in order to make those connections, you have to reach out and kind of start a connection. And there's one place to start a conversation with a complete stranger. It's a barbershop. And I think that's why my particular situation works so well, is because this is, in a way, a meeting place for everybody to meet your state rep who happens to be getting a haircut, or to meet somebody who, has been down on their luck and is trying to start over, or to see the police chief, or, anyone else. And really make those connections in a meaningful way, person to person, so that you remember who they are because of their face, because of their voice, because of the story that you heard, and the camaraderie that you established. And I think that's great. The way that I have kind of reached out since being here, I think we're working on 6 years now, is reaching out with the city, because I don't like to wait for other people to do things. I really don't like waiting at all. I find meetings to be very frustrating because I think things can be meetinged to death. But despite that fact, I was willing to go to city council meetings, sit with people who knew the lay of the land, where people are coming from. Because if I don't understand where they're coming from, how can I best communicate what I'm looking for and what I'm trying to help with or change, or what I can offer? So it's been an experience here, but in the last 6 years, downtown itself has blossomed from being on life support to having a flourishing coffee shop, local farm-to-table restaurants, We have a cobbler that most people don't even know what they do, but, you know, shoe repair, leather repair, zippers, anything you could think of that, you know, it needs to be fixed.
And you've been a big part of that, Bree. I mean, I think even the cobbler tuned in here. We're going to need to move on, but are you glad you made this decision to move to Rurol, a rural town?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I have way more ability to foster change here than I do anywhere else.
Awesome. Thanks, Bree. We'll get back and hold. If there's a last thought, we'll make sure to get back to it. Can I move on?
By all means.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Bree. We're now going to hear from Whitney Kimball-Coe. She serves as the coordinator of the National Rural Assembly. The Assembly is a network of more than 500 organizations and individuals across the U.S. who work towards building better policy and more opportunity in rural America for families and communities. She has been featured as a speaker for the Obama Foundation, also on Being with Krista Tippett, if you listen to that on NPR, and at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Her focus on building civic courage in communities is directly tied to a practice of participation in her hometown of Athens, Tennessee, where she lives with her husband and 2 daughters. We look forward to your story and your perspective. Whitney, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this webinar, and I loved what everyone has said so far. Ben, Brittany, Bree, that's nice alliteration too, Ben, Brittany, Bree. And especially that last remark that Bree just made about, you know, she's able to foster change here probably more than any other place she could. And I think having worked with the National Rural Assembly and the Center for Rural Strategies for the past 10 years, I can say anecdotally, Ben, that I think that people my age and millennials are very interested in living a life of creation and a life that's focused on building meaning and purpose. And I think they're finding that rural communities are places where that slate is sometimes blank, sometimes that jar is empty and it needs to be filled. And for those of us who are really focused on building that life, then rural is a great opportunity for us. Just from the National Rural Assembly perspective, I mean, I can think of a number of young millennials who have gone back to their regions and their hometowns to work on specific issues that are very resonant with broad audiences right now in this day and age. I think of Tim Lampkin, for instance, who's in the Mississippi Delta working on closing the racial wealth gap there. I think of Anna Clausen in Minnesota, who's trying to conduct conversations, civic dialogues about really politicized topics like climate change and having those conversations in rural communities. I think about Nikiko Masumoto, who's out in Delray, California, who has returned to her family's organic peach farm and is, you know, learning the ways and the culture and the and how to be part of the land and part of the community there. So I think there are all these really important anecdotes and stories that are out there that do exist for that can aid and inspiration for people like me and other millennials who are currently living, working, and worshiping in rural communities. I'm really lucky that I have a macro experience of working in rural places, but I also have this micro experience because I was born and raised in a small town of about 13,000 people in Athens, Tennessee, and I still live there. And I'm able to live there because of broadband. I'm able to work from home for the Center for Rural Strategies because I have a fairly good connection. That's not true for everyone in my county, and that certainly is a challenge that millennials are facing. But I think getting back to this idea of millennials looking for community, for connection, and for the ability to create things it's a really important point. So when I moved back home, I was very pleased that I could take on a number of leadership roles. I write for my local newspaper. I teach fitness classes at the YMCA. I help young entrepreneurs think about where they could put their business and how to grow it and work with Main Street. And of course, I couldn't help myself and had to run for public office in 2016, and I ran for city council. This picture you see here is the day that I decided to run. It was the last day you could put in a petition, and you needed 50 signatures. So I just called everyone I knew, and they all came down to the courthouse and signed my petition. I did not win that race, probably because I had that smug look on my face right there. That's not true. It was one of the most empowering experiences of my life to run for public office. And just when you think you know your community, it's proven that you don't necessarily know it fully. So running for office is yet another great way to be in relationship, to build meaning, and to get to know your community and the challenges that they face. I think I do have a master plan as a millennial in a small town that I want to encourage other millennials to come home and come build this new life with me in Athens. This is a picture of my best friend Lauren and our daughters. And I would say that my master plan is working in Athens, that we have a strong cohort of young people who are taking over some of the key institutions in town, but they're also creating a new energy and new institutions as well. And this is a picture from the 2016 campaign. I ran against 5 men. And another reason that millennials perhaps might be a glutton for punishment when they move home is, we're disruptors at the same time. And the idea that a woman could be on the city council is a kind of radical notion in my neck of the woods. So I was proud to bear that flag in that campaign, and since then have been able to take on many more leadership opportunities to create the kind of community in the future that we want to see in Athens. So I'll leave it at that. I know we're going to have a lot of questions.
Awesome. Whitney and everybody, so many of the questions have already been answered by your fabulous presentation, so many, many thanks to all of you. One of them was jobs, and I just want to say, in quoting many of you, people, Ben, people don't move to a country place for jobs. People have to wear many hats. That we heard from Brittany. Even the Fallows from the last call talked about beer breweries and distilleries, and Madeline Moore from Chinook, Washington wrote in, and she said she owns a bakery, she has a metalwork industry, her husband works at a distillery, she runs Rethinking Rurol, and all of you, kind of shine at that. There might not be a specific job there. Many of you also have one, but sometimes you have to throw together a lot of things. One thing, just a short little thing, Ben, but I had folks from Oregon, Utah, and South Carolina wonder, what's a good-sized town for millennials? I don't know if there is such a thing, but Ben, would you have a thought about that? We can't hear you. I'm not hearing you, Ben.
Oh, sorry,
Try again.
I was unmuted.
Okay, there you are.
Yeah, we did find that every size community really provided opportunities and were attractors. Some people wanted to move to, larger towns of 5 to 10,000. Others would move to towns of 300 people. We found them literally everywhere.
Okay, and Whitney, pretty much the same thing, and the size doesn't really matter, and maybe if we can get the discussion.
Fran, you're muted.
Oh, am I? No. I shouldn't be muted.
Mm-mm. No, I can hear you, Fran.
You can?
I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whitney, was the town size a big matter for your big group?
No, I don't think so. And when those people that I mentioned before, Nikiko, Tim, Anna, for instance, they all live in different sized towns, and they're all creating purpose in those places.
It's creating purpose. I also hear, what do millennials want? So I'm going to kind of go down a list. Bree, maybe you can help us with housing services and amenities. It sounded people from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Dolestown, PA, Biddeford, Maine, what about housing and what services and amenities do we have? You didn't have much in Laconia, but you have more now. What do you think is a real attractor on that level for millennials?
For Laconia, I think the amount of amenities we have here that are natural, the 3 lakes that we touch, we have a ski mountain for the wintertime. There's a lot of places where you can do all sorts of water and recreation, a lot of hiking. The White Mountains are, a short drive up north. So all of those natural amenities that people want to take advantage of that you don't get in a metropolitan area.
Okay. And Brittany, you already talked about having the arts and restaurants and even a historic district, and people from Swanton, Vermont to Tenino, Washington were wondering about how arts and cultural events and resources, what kind of those things do millennials want? And even since you mentioned historic heritage, Eileen, the mayor of Twin City, Georgia, asked about that, and is historic heritage still important? So that whole cultural arts, historic heritage, can you take that on and just address how you think millennials react to that?
I'm going to have to take it in probably 2 bites, but the first part, that's that 5 jobs in 1. But really what it is, it's really about us kind of embracing our past in rural America. And I think we do that very, very well by embracing, once again, the history of our towns. And so I think when you think of, I guess, the popular places to live when it comes to like Metro USA, they're gutting out warehouses to create these fabulous apartment buildings instead of like keeping them like the way they are or something like that. So I guess in a sense, it's best to keep nostalgia alive. That's what attracts millennials, that piece of nostalgia. Like, you don't have to change the exterior of the side of your downtown to make it more beautiful. You just got to probably repaint it and make the inside a little bit more appealing. That's what we're really trying to embrace. I think when we come back, we're not trying to be a part of what we left. We're trying to be a part of what you currently are. And I think Ben said that very, very well in his presentation. I think another part of that is when you're talking about the arts and culture, we have a lot, like I said, we have the Galesburg Civic Arts Center, we have the Orpheum Theater, we have ballet, symphonies, we have a lot of things that come to town. We have comedy shows, we have local theater troupes. It's all about what people are really interested in. We have at least 2 choral groups that are in town. We have prairie players. Like I said, it's really those micro pieces that people, they might be 15 people or 20 people strong, but they're dedicated to that particular thing as opposed to maybe something else. And that's okay. And they learn to thrive in those environments. So I hope that answers some of the questions. Like I said, we do have, railroad days. We have a lot of different festivals. And it's really, once again, around making sure that we enjoy the heritage. We want to enjoy the nostalgia. We want to be a part of something that really matters to us. Once again, just that reflection of self. And so I think that we do a really great job in doing that.
Great, thanks. Just really being a part of something, that's a key piece.
Impact, yes.
Whitney, the other thing that a lot of people asked about was the role of education, both K through 12 at kind of encouraging people to stay, because a lot of the focus is you got to go away for a while or come back, and or a lot of towns feel you have to have a college as an attractor. To what degree does that help, and what if you don't have a college nearby that brings young people in?
Well, I have some thoughts about that, but I don't know if I'm the best person for this question. Just some of the thoughts I have about school systems and education in rural places. I think it's essential to have public education system, or it is a key factor in the health of a rural community, and I think that is a really important attractor and attractive for millennials who are looking to raise their children there. I think rural communities and the education systems there are facing some real challenges right now. And I know in my hometown, millennials right now are on the forefront of that conversation about, do we consolidate? Do we renovate? Do we, what do we do next? And we're the ones who are going to be footing the bill. We're the ones that are going to be, raising this next generation in our community. So it's very, very, I feel like this is the moment for us to be at the forefront of that conversation. Athens also has a college, a very small college. It's Tennessee Wesleyan. My grandfather was actually president of it during the 70s and 80s, a small Methodist college, and that does lend another distinctive piece to life in Athens, but I wouldn't say that it's essential to have a small college right there. As long as you have a pathway towards toward what's next for kids. I think that's the most important thing, and maybe that's community college, maybe it's not, but I think that K through 12 piece is really, really essential.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I do too. A number of questions had to do with bridging the generation gap. Heidi from Little Falls, Minnesota wondered if older generations are being welcoming, which is a question that Ben asked. A banker from Pipestone, Minnesota wanted to figure out how to get them to show up. He was kind of upset that, you know, how do I get them to be part of this? And Ben, I think you addressed that a little bit. A professor from Bailey, Colorado, asked how to get them to put down their phones, and Jag from Hinton, West Virginia, wants to know how to best facilitate connections between generations, and maybe that's the one to focus on is how can older generations connect, support, and encourage without being disparaging. Ben, you had a few thoughts about that.
Right. I think we do a disservice to the young people every day when we start casting judgments at them for how they live their lives. Honestly, the most effective method of community organizing is a text message. And so before we tell people to put down their phone, I think we should recognize the ways in which it provides this kind of connectivity. Phones are not and technology is not something that was created outside of us. Technology is a reflection of who we are and what we want. It doesn't get born outside and now we're forced to adhere to it. These are the choices we made as a society to reflect what we want. So rather than shunning it, I think we should be finding more ways to embrace it. Because if we don't embrace it, we are not going to continue to do any type of bridging work. I mean, imagine you have a community event, you want to have a community supper. How do you get the word out? Right? Well, you put it on the newspaper. Put it in the newspaper. Well, is it on the front page of the website? You put it on the radio. Is it on Pandora? I mean, if it's on Facebook, you're over the age of 30. I mean, if it's email, every one of these things, when it comes down to it, the most effective way of community organizing is a text message. But what pre-necessitates a text message is a relationship. And if you don't have a relationship with the younger people in your community, you're not going to be effective in the ways that you community organize. So I think that come to us needs to do more I'm coming to you in terms of community organizing.
Okay. I have just two more questions. One is for everybody, and we'll kind of sum up about how you market a small town. But a couple people asked about incentives to help millennials choose a city. Do any of your towns actually have incentives to bring people in? Is that something any of you have a sense about? Just make your town great, right? Be welcoming.
There are thousands of towns across. Yeah, there are thousands of towns across the U.S. right now that offer free lots. It's been an incentive program, but we also have had states offer things like loan forgiveness for returnees, not for newcomers, but for returnees. I think Vermont has one going on right now, a $10,000 help you pay for moving costs and whatnot to get you to the community. But ultimately, like for me, housing is the crux of this. I think there was a discussion earlier about preferences for millennial housing, and whenever I kind of cringe when I look at some of these studies that are saying like millennials, they prefer like small footprints of property and small homes, and that's not what they want. That's what they can afford when they're in the metropolitan areas. So in many ways, I think that our rural communities are at a real advantage here, and just letting people know, number one, you can be a blank in rural America, and that blank can be filled in with every occupation and every industry. And again, for me, it's about the narrative. If the narrative is negative, you never believe you could be a book editor in rural Minnesota, when in fact you can.
And I think we do.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think we do ourselves and millennials a disservice when we think that incentives are the only way to get them to come. That not to forget that millennials are very driven by desire to participate and create and not just consume. So trusting them to find their way in some cases is just I think that's a real important part of it too.
Fantastic. So in summing it up, which Ben did a little bit, but for each of you, effective strategies or messaging for attracting millennials to come to smaller towns. What can a town do that we might have missed or bears repeating? Brittany, we haven't heard from you for a minute, so I'm gonna throw this at you first. So, what would you tell towns who are like, we want them here, but we don't know where to begin?
I would tell towns that I understand and realize and take into consideration what millennials rather struggle with or with like what they deal with when they're in a metro environment. They're dealing with traffic. They're dealing with high costs of, just living expenses, from housing to food to just going out. Like there's a lot of expenses that live there, as well as just a very fast-paced lifestyle. So instead of trying to be that, be the antithesis. Be who you are and enjoy the fact that you're a little bit slow-paced. We're a little bit slow-paced, and that's fine. Some people really want that and they need that. We obviously want affordable housing. We don't want to be stuck, like you said, in a hole somewhere. We want to be able to have housing that we enjoy. And we also, once again, want the growth experiences from work and the ability to have impact. Whitney had said it well as well about having an impact in a smaller community. And that's really what you can have here. And so I think a lot of maybe small communities were pushed off of that thought process by larger companies. Come here and have a great impact at, Fortune 100 company. Well, that great impact is right at home in rural America.
Awesome. I just want to note it is 2 o'clock, but I think this is too dynamic and too important a question. So just hang with us for just another few minutes. Bree, what would you say to towns?
I would say definitely embrace what irritates you about millennials. It's very much yes, we don't put down our phones, so give us something to look at. Upgrade your technology so that we can be more engaged in what we already engage in. Live stream your city council meetings. That way we can tune in no matter where we are. Not just, throwing them on YouTube, but, give it a live stream so we know that we can watch it happen as it happens. Don't settle for only having like 8% of your population get the newsletter that your city hall sends out via email. Use technology to your advantage. Start having your various departments in the city coordinate and not just have their own separate Facebook pages, because that's how you guys have always done it. Throw out every time you catch yourself saying, well, that's the way it's always been done. Stop yourself, bite your tongue, and go, how can we make it different? And millennials will be happy to step up and give you an innovative way to solve a problem that you may have had for 20 years and haven't found a way to solve. But the economy is different, the people are different, and it's a new day.
Fantastic, Bree. Thank you so much. And Ben, you kind of summed it up, but did you have one more word here you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just say that stop telling people they're not really from here until they've lived here for 30 years. I think the folks that have moved to your community moved there for really great reasons. So I'll just say the best $150 ever spent is a newcomer supper. And that event is only for newcomers to socially engage with each other. But one thing you can do is have your young people in high school do short interviews with those newcomers and record them and ask them, like, why did you move here? Or what do you love about this place? Because many times those high school kids, this will be the first time they have ever heard that people love this community for all these great reasons. Then put it on YouTube, put it on Twitter, put it on Facebook. The best proponents of your small towns are the people that just moved there.
Fantastic advice. And finally, Whitney, go ahead.
And I was going to say yes to Ben, absolutely. And yes to the people who are already there, the millennials who are already there. You may have just a few and you're looking to grow that population. So take care of the ones who are there. Find ways to engage them, include them, and build relationships with them, because my master plan is working. They will draw their friends. They will build a community. It takes time. This is not a quick fix or a quick strategy, but relationship is everything. So take care of the people who are right in front of you.
Awesome. This has been a wonderful call. I want to thank you all across many time zones. Ben Winchester in Minnesota, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brittany Grimes, they're lucky to have you in Galesburg. It's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bree Henderson, we hope you're feeling better, and thank you for watching over an incredible change in Laconia, New Hampshire.
Thanks.
And Whitney Kimball Coe, thank you for all you do and for joining us from Tennessee. We also want to thank the Orton Family Foundation and partners Daily Yonder and the Citizens Institute for Rural Design, who make these sessions possible for our participants today. And for everybody who listened in, we encourage you to please take a moment to fill out a survey that I believe is at near the top. Oh, there it is, survey right there on your page. Provided there's a link right there that so we can serve you better in the future. A recording of this webinar will be sent out to all registrants and will be posted on our website, www.orton.org. And stay tuned. We'll be back in February to uncover what rural and small town communities are doing about the opiate crisis. Thank you for joining us today. For the Orton Family Foundation, I'm Fran Stoddard. Thank you all. What a great group and what a great audience we've had. Thanks for all the great chat that we've had. See you next time. Bye-bye.